Welcome to the Learning Reinvented Podcast, brought to you by myself, Katie Godden.
And James Politulo of the Learning Effect. There are lots of learning podcasts out there, so we wanted to do something slightly different. In this episode, we're going to be looking at how learning teams should be helping their people and their organisation focus on what's really important to learn. Now, Katie, the reason we've sort of picked this topic for this week is at the moment it feels like everything's constantly moving. So if you're in that space of being in a role in an organisation, or even in our roles, we're seeing that the world's moving, tech's moving. It seems that there's always a new thing every week, and it seems really hard to keep on top of just the world in general, let alone what I'm meant to be learning and what skills I should be picking up, what qualifications I should have, what makes me relevant in my current role, what's going to make me employable in the future. So given all of that, how are learning teams reacting to that, and how should they be reacting to that?
I think the fundamentals of people's roles are still relevant. Like what we've said in the past about things like AI and kind of hot topics, they come and go, and you can learn parts of it, but are they still going to be relevant from this year to next, etc., etc. So I think we still need to have the fundamentals of our jobs that we need to be learning, but we need to keep things relevant as well. So we need to ensure that we're understanding what we're learning. We're not just learning it for the sake of learning. Like we see lots of things about kind of learning AI, but I'm not entirely sure what people mean by that a lot of times, because AI is a tool that can help in lots of different ways, but I'm not entirely sure, unless you're building AI, what that actually entails when it says about learning it. Because it's something normally that's pretty easy to use. So it's not a lot of learning kind of required. But I think it's making sure that if we are implementing things like new technology, we're keeping it relevant to people's job roles. So they're learning it in the way that it's going to help support them in that job role. So it might be that you've perhaps incorporated something like AI, for example, and we create training that's based around using it in your job role, as opposed to teaching you about absolutely everything in it. So yeah, what do you think?
I think there's a lot of noise at the moment, and it's very easy to do almost one of two things as either a learning team or an individual, is to just not do anything because you just ride it out. That's a very natural reaction of going, well, there's a load of noise, we'll just carry on doing what we did. And when everything settles, we'll adapt and evolve as we go ahead. And I think a lot of people in organizations will be doing that. So you might have certain people in organization wanting to jump on what's seen as the AI or whatever bandwagon that might be at the moment. And then there'll be people just going, well, no, that's not relevant. I've got a day job here to deliver, and that's what I need to do. So I think stepping back and not being swayed like you're there in the wind or just being buffeted by the waves, and thinking about those three things of what's the relevance of this? So how relevant is this to my organization and where we're going? How durable is it? Because if we go back and look, a year, 6 months ago, everyone was talking about learning prompt engineering, and that was how you were going to get ahead in AI. Now, if you've used any of the large language models or any of the AI tools that people will be familiar with, like Claude and ChatGPT, etc., you'll see now that you don't really need to have prompt engineering, because the tools have learned how to guide you through and helped you build prompt. So in terms of that starting, that's becoming less and less important. So it became maybe very important for an early adopter at one stage, and then it fell away. And a lot of people probably never even learned that skill because it was a technical-ish skill at that point that falls away. So that durability of what we're learning, rather than jump on the fad and think about what, you might have some people who need to know those key skills because they're at the bleeding edge of what they're doing. And then transferability. So is there anything that goes beyond what you're doing within your role and will keep that context going? So this is not just going to last now in that very, very niche role you're doing, but this is going to have applicability beyond that. And one model I like to think about is if you've got a sort of three layers to a person, you've got the skills that you will see at the end. So that might be using Excel, that might be prompting in ChatGPT, it might be delivering customer service, it might be writing an email. You've then got the behavioral stuff that sort of falls under that, which is, how do I carry out those things and how do I behave with my team? Some more of those soft skills that we'd badged them in the past. And then you've got that bit in the middle of people, which is their beliefs. And those are some of the things that really drive however someone will react to things, whether that's in the current context or as the context changes. So maybe we need to spend a little bit time not focusing so much on the outside, the skills stuff, because there's lots of things going on that, but really looking at how we help the individual to evolve and be the best of themselves they can be to survive and thrive in whichever situation things are thrown at them.
Yeah, because I think I haven't really noticed, and I could be wrong, but lots of people's jobs fundamentally changing because of new technology or new phases or new trends or whatever that might be. So I think in regards to training, that pretty much stays the same. But I think it's good to have different skill sets so we can evolve our jobs as well and support them, like you said. But I think some of that isn't necessarily going out and creating loads of training on it. It's where we go back to where we've talked about in the past, like perhaps you curate that. So you go and find some really great training that's out there, and it might be YouTube videos, it could be a training provider, whatever that might look like. But equally, it's not something that's going to take up lots of your time, but still keep people relevant if they've got that interest in there so they can help evolve in that way. But I think it's when it fundamentally changes your role, I think that's when it becomes important to obviously do the training. But that's where it comes back to the relevance piece as well, isn't it? Because you need to keep it relevant in order to help be successful in your role as an individual, but as in the company role as well. So what are you trying to achieve? We don't need to teach people absolutely everything. And I think creating that more kind of bite-sized, easy to view, micro learning, whatever you want to call it, will help you be able to do that and enable that to be done better because, and I think it's not mandatory content as well, some of this. I don't think it's stuff that you have to learn, because I don't think it's for everyone either. And this is, I think we spoke about this before anyway, sort of last year. These are the conversations that we're having. There's a bit of blind panic of like, oh my God, what do we need to know? Do we need to know absolutely everything? And I don't think, and I think we said that you probably didn't need to. You're going to have those people that are super interested in it that will naturally just learn it anyway. And you'll have people where it perhaps impacts their jobs. And then you'll have people that not engaging in it whatsoever. And I think that's still relevant now. And I don't think, as much as I thought things had evolved and were going quite rapidly, sort of this time last year, I think it's sort of slowed down slightly. And people are perhaps using new technology, not necessarily just AI, and they're seeing that perhaps it doesn't do exactly what they want them to do. So is it right? And, how do you implement that? How do you embed that? So I think it's slowed it down a little bit anyway.
I think it's taking that one step further of, if I don't want to make this conversation about AI, because it should be about the ever evolving world of skills. And that's really what the challenge is how's the world around you moving and what do you need to do differently. And if you're just learning skills and you view your job as I need to have the skill to do this, skills can fall over quite quickly. But that's where the capability conversation comes in a bit more. So I don't need to be able to do this task well. What I need to be able to do is achieve this outcome well. Because then if the world moves around me, that outcome can still be there because the outcomes very rarely change. It's the way we do them that changes. And getting people to almost have the curiosity and the ability to judge when the world's moving and when they need to move pragmatically. That's almost the key skill to me, of that adaptability, being able to read the room, being able to read the wider environment, and know when that way you're doing something, I'm now flogging something, or I've got a skill that is becoming obsolete. And we don't end up with lots of people in panic mode because the world's moved and they are out of a job, because an industry's moved and suddenly, hundreds of people have been replaced, which is happening in certain companies. No one's necessarily saying it's AI or whatever, but you're seeing a rapid move of the market, and therefore people have to reposition themselves and think about, what are my skills, what am I doing in that place. But if my job is talking to customers on the phone, that's gone a lot of the time. That ability, that if my job is creating great customer experiences and outcomes, then I view myself slightly differently, and I can evolve with, it doesn't really matter what avenue I'm doing that in. I'm viewing that outcome as something that I'm trying to achieve, or that my company's trying to achieve. So if our company goal is to innovate and make sure that we've got the cutting edge products in the market, or that we've got the best insight into what our customers need out there, if those are the capabilities you're trying to build in your organization, then you need to get into dialogue with your business as to, what do you do to understand what those capabilities, organizational capabilities, require people to be able to do to fulfill those. And I think it just takes it back a level from worrying about a course or a skill or instruction as to how to do something, but creating that mindset, creating that ability to experiment, to think, to horizon scan. And then maybe your role is trying to help people to do some of those things. So if innovation and creativity is important, how are you giving people access to those sources of innovation, creativity, thought leadership, experimentation places, time, so the role becomes very different than just producing a set of courses. And like we'll see from lots of the providers, oh, we've got an AI tool that can produce your content quicker and better, but I still don't think those people are anywhere close to understanding how that helps an organization, rather than just keeps people in a system which may not be taking them to where they need to be.
I think skill sets are also sort of unrealistic as well, because it's basically defining your job by loads of skills. And I don't think that's real life. Because I don't think, like you said, it's more around the capability side of things, because I don't think you have specific skills that are applied to everything, because otherwise you'd have tons and tons and tons of skills. And sometimes they might look different for someone else. But they might essentially be the same skill. You might just be doing something differently, but it becomes increasingly more difficult. And I think this is why in the learning industry is something that we haven't quite solved. And there's been in the past lots of talk about skills and how we create that skills gap, and how we fill that skills gap, sorry, and how we measure skills and how we track skills. But I think it's so difficult to define, because every organization might do the same thing, but it looks slightly different. But ultimately, it's the same skill set. So I think it's more about letting people learn in a way that suits them, providing them with that fundamental bits of training that are relevant to their jobs. But then the skill sets kind of sit outside of that as well, I think. And some things can't be learnt by people as well. And that's fine too, if that makes sense. Not everyone's going to pick up certain skills, but it doesn't necessarily define their whole job. But I think when you put it down like that, it becomes too unrealistic. Like I said, it's not true, and it's not a true reflection. You could be poorer in one skill, but it doesn't mean you're bad at your job, but because you excel at other skills and things like that. I think it's really hard to translate that, and that's why we haven't done it in learning yet, because it's so difficult. But I think where you've got competencies, where you often find competency frameworks throughout HR, throughout learning, I think that's something that's easily or more easier to achieve. But I think learning suppliers don't necessarily hone in on that because it's something that can be different. But I think, again, this is where you could take a skill set from a learning person and go, actually, it's not about knowing every individual skill or competency. It's about understanding the process in order to be able to help people understand their competencies and then apply that to their workforce. I think that's where we sort of lack as well. But yeah, it's not something that's easy, but equally, I think we're overthinking it and over engineering it. And then we're at fear of potentially losing lots of good people as well.
Yeah, I think we're in danger of doing lots of those things you said, so overcomplicating it, but then I think we oversimplify it as well just to make it manageable. Because
Yeah.
if you take that capability thing and think, well, most learning roles, as we already said, as we have always said, are around driving performance of the organization. They're not about learning, they're about driving performance at the heart of it. So the capability required within learning teams to do that, if you then look at the 100 million different shades of what a learning team looks like, they are not the same. If it was as easy as A plus B plus C, like a skills matrix to deliver learning, every learning team would look the same, but it doesn't because the context and everything else is different around it. Therefore, the capabilities required to deliver performance there are different, but there are some key themes in there about understanding business objectives, understanding your people. Those things don't really change. And that curiosity, experimentation, being able to step back and evaluate what you're doing and see whether it is having an impact, spot where you need to intervene and where you don't, spot where you need to guide and move the organization with whatever tools or solutions or interventions of any sort you need to do. But people don't. They drop down and they go into, I need to be good at learning design, or I need to be good at learning needs analysis. And that sort of just loses it. And then to make that easy to understand, we then say, well, are you a beginner? Are you advanced? Are you an expert? Are you a master? And we come up with different levels for a skill. And how do you become a master at something? Well, take anything. I might be a master at that, but move my context and I drop from being a master to being absolutely useless.
And
So
what's the master?
exactly.
This is like none of it's relevant. This is the tricky bit.
But it's easy to code in that simplistic way that we've had in the past. So it's interesting to think about because every step in change in technology or capability has helped us evolve to being less bad than what we were. Because if you think back a number of years, the best thing people had was clip art in PowerPoints for training or acetates on a roll in at the front of a lecture room. And things have moved and evolved, not always for the better, but it's coming back in the same way to what's the capabilities, not just of learning, but for the whole organization and how do we shape those things? Because if I was sat in a team and looking at what I wanted from my learning team, it would be space and direction because I don't have time to be looking at everything. I might be bombarded with lots of stuff and I never have time to go back to it. If you look at my LinkedIn, there's loads of articles or things I see and I think, oh, that's really great. I'll bookmark it. Can't remember the last time I went back to a bookmarked piece of content because the world's moved on, something else happened. Maybe I did because it had real relevance, but that's the same that people have got in our organizations. So we're throwing content and solutions and options and things at them, and most things just bounce off us. How often does something really stick and resonate with you that you're going to go back or you're going to take the time out of your day or your week or your month to do something?
I think this is where the relevance piece comes in, and what we always talk about in pretty much all of our podcasts is a purpose. And kind of what we spoke about at the beginning of this podcast, it's making sure it's relevant to someone's job. And you've got that fundamental there, but the fundamentals are probably the bits that are getting people to do to do the learning. The fundamentals are probably the bits that are getting people to go and actually do learning because they're not sure of those bits. But I think that's what surrounds all of that as well, is making it as easy as possible. Because you often find where you've got organizations where they haven't got access to learning in an easy way. You've got to go and hunt it, and you've got to find it, and you've got to go reference it, or it might be in a SCORM course, and that's 30 minutes long, and you've got to click through lots of stuff. You aren't going to go back and look at that, because who can be bothered to do that? Whereas if you make it easy and relevant and familiar, and create that more social learning, perhaps, if it's appropriate for your organization, people are more likely to go back and reference stuff as well. But you've got to think, a lot of people don't go onto their learning systems to do that. I think perhaps we're at fault of perhaps thinking of learning of how we learn to do things in our everyday lives, but that isn't reflected in our working lives, because what we do at work is just the mandatory stuff for the most part. And those extra bits that we'd like people to do, which I think learning people would like people to do, are the bits that people don't do, because we're not making it easy enough, and we're not making it relevant, and we're again over engineering it. I think it could be simplified and just made a lot easier, and I think we'd solve some of these issues. But we're trying to go, everything has to be in a learning plan, everything has to be a skill, everything has to be relevant, but it doesn't. I could have an interest in something and it's nothing to do with my job, that's fine. But I could go and read about it and actually learn stuff, and it could impact my job, who knows. I think that's what we're doing that's potentially wrong. But then you're at risk of opening up too much. There's ways and means about it, but I think at the moment we're too prescriptive in the way that we think towards learning. Everything has to be like for a job role, for a learning plan, whatever that might be. And then you get issued it based on you as an individual and stuff like that, over personalization. And I think just make it a lot more simple, and I think people, and easy to access, and I think people would naturally go there as your sort of work Google, as opposed to going on Google. But I've yet to see it been done really well in any organization, but I think that would be the ideal, and I think it would help some of these things.
I would spend more time focusing on those core things that aren't going to change, and build the capability of your people to drive the capability of their function. Because if their job is to ensure that they always have the most innovative products, and you create, well, what capabilities do we need to have that working? Then as a team, what capabilities do we have at the moment, and what's working for us, what's not? It becomes simpler. It becomes a framework that you can apply to whatever you're doing. And then coming back to where you said about skills, now, if you view AI in the assistant thing, if you use AI and the other tools and everything else within your disposal, whether that's team members, network, whatever, to ensure you have the capability to do what you need to do. So if you're not great at writing emails, doesn't matter, because you're good at this, or I'm good at coordinating all these things, or I'm good at problem solving. So it almost takes it back that level. And I've seen comms and promotion around things like AI help break down barriers for people who are maybe neurodivergent, or were not seen as capable in the past, because they raise the floor on some of those skills that were a way of stopping people getting forward, and those other positives people were bringing weren't shining through. So I think if we step back and look at that capability and say, right, Katie, you are in charge of this, or this is the goal, or this is what you're looking to achieve. How you achieve that to how I achieve that will be different. We're different people. We have different mindsets. We have similar values, hence why we work together, but we come at things in very different ways. Doesn't mean yours is right and mine's wrong, or vice versa. But it's about using that capability, and about the goals and outcomes and how we're trying to get there, and then coaching, feedback, interest in new ways, experimentation, evaluating what we're doing, and those things coming together to me, a learning team isn't about content at all anymore. It's about that ecosystem around every team and then every individual, and ensuring they've got a performance improvement process and a capability improvement cycle going on within their business. And it's the equivalent of, if you think about, you buy a house, and if you don't keep the maintenance up and you don't keep modernizing it and keep a budget to be able to replace the boiler proactively, put in things on this, change the decor over time, all you end up doing is bleeding this on repairs and fixing the boiler when it breaks and dealing with the leak from the roof. And that feels like where most learning teams are. They're in that space of the emergency repair because this has hit them and this has come. Whereas if we think about building the capabilities of our team and helping our team understand how their capabilities evolve to the business, and we're feeding in to give them the capability to ride that wave, that to me is where we step back and add real value. And I think we've been doing in the past is just going, emergency, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. So that's where I'd spin the difference round, is to, I think it's always been the case, but it's now more and more evident that that's where learning teams need to support their business in that way. The proactive things forever, and the emergency stuff, operational teams are great at dealing with that stuff. When something unexpected happens, that's where operational teams should be, not, well, let's get a learning solution that's going to take 6 months to put together and roll that out. Then that operational bit's gone away anyway. So that's where I'd be focusing.
You think you'd need to change how you hire people as well to help get some of those bits? Because if you look at people's if you look at job descriptions, job roles, and advertisements, through recruitment agencies, whatever they are, you often find, especially in regards to learning, they have absolutely everything on there. So if you look at like a digital learning expert, it's not that they're just digital learning. They need to know how to operate and implement and navigate and look after a learning system. But equally, it's creating content, being a video editor, like tons of skills that I think is really stupid just for one person. You're not splitting that out. And I think that's where you end up getting kind of the same boring learning, where you're just putting plasters over stuff and you're not being particularly innovative, and you're not, because what you're saying is basically give people the toolkit to be able to manage those emergencies as and when they come in themselves, which I completely agree with. And don't over engineer it, because most of it isn't, and most of it sometimes isn't even learning. It could be comms, it's just telling someone something, and it's how you do that. But I think people think too much about it, and then they try and put everyone in the same bucket, and it doesn't work. You need to split that out and see things as valuable. And some of it is transferable as well, because I think if you're someone that likes technology, you're going to like other things. But I think if you want a really if you want a really good videographer, they're going to have that specific skill set. They're not necessarily going to be able to do the other bits. This is where it comes back to being not skilled and stuff as well. But I think that would help with some of these issues as well, is if you overhaul job descriptions and CVs. And instead of just going what job you worked in and for what company you worked in and give a brief overview, like you've always said, James, in CVs, like give the outcomes of like what you've actually achieved and what that meant and the impact. But equally, the job description needs to say that as well. It's like, actually, this is what I'm trying to achieve, not list loads of stuff. Because actually, I might not have done all of those stuff, but I could help you achieve that thing. You just haven't listed it on there because you're looking at something and you're pigeonholing everyone. I think everything needs to change and be more flexible and agile in that approach in order to be able to achieve those things. I've always thought that. And when I've worked in organizations, I look at people, I'm like, I could do your job, but I wouldn't be allowed to do your job because I don't have a specific qualification in it. And I think that's mad. and crazy, and I don't understand it.
Mm, Again, you've seen over the years lots of stuff around breaking down hierarchies, breaking down departmental barriers. Like you said, the videographer skill, is relevant to marketing, relevant to comms, relevant to learning,
Yeah.
relevant to CS. Lots of different functions in there, but someone always owns them. I remember when going back to one of my roles, we owned the videographer and we're constantly having to lend them out because they were in the learning team, but they had so much more organizational impact. But until we took that capability in house it was a storytelling capability.
Mm.
That's what the videographer delivered was storytelling for the organization. And as soon as you think about that and step back and say, to sell to our customers, to sell our brand, to sell our employee experience, to upsell the skills and capabilities and our leadership and our culture, that storytelling was critically important, but it wasn't seen as a capability to that point. That was just outsourced on point to different things, and there was costly and whatever. But without stepping back and really looking at the capability, then maybe what you need is very different
Mm.
for your organization.
Because I can edit a video, but you don't want me to make your cool video that you want to like advertise stuff about because mine's going to be crap. You want the videographer that's actually good at storytelling, like you said. I think that's where it comes back to defining skills is really difficult because, yeah, I can edit a video and they can edit a video, but who's going to do it better for what you want to achieve? This is why you need to have that capability, but also that description and that outcome. They're the things that are really important, but we don't seem to value them.
No, we don't. And we don't have, selling compelling stories or creating compelling stories as the lead. We have being able to use this video editor,
Yeah,
being able to use this equipment, being able to, you know, converse with stakeholders, and all of it just is nonsense without that sort of headline goal of, well, how you can get there could be this way, or this way. And like you've said, technically, both you and I could do a lot of those things underneath, but I can come up with a storyboard outline and a
mm.
concept, but can I turn that into reality? No, I can't. So again, it's understanding where those thoughts are.
And also why some of these things. I think this comes back to I think we're so restricted by pointless things. And I don't know what restricts us. I think if you can use a specific type of camera, if we're going down the videographer route, you can probably adapt and use other cameras because they all work in a similar way. But you understand the core skills of videography, like what looks good, how to shoot a video, whatever that might be. They're the bits that you understand. The nuances that sit around what type of camera you have are really irrelevant, but they're the things that we focus on. And that's just crazy. Like, why focus on that? And like, why have that as a particular skill or, when it's not relevant? And also, this comes back to the relevance piece that I spoke about at the very beginning, because actually if you gave me that camera, it's now relevant for me to learn that camera, so I'm going to go and wait and learn that camera, and that could be through any means, and that's fine, but my outcome's learning it. And so I think we don't think like that. We just think that people have to learn this certain bit of information and then that will make them competent, skilled, whatever, but it doesn't. It's all the bits that sit around the edge. But yeah.
Exactly. And if you take that up and again, using this one analogy we sort of stuck on, but we're talking about relevance, which you've just touched upon, durability. Well, I learn one camera, but then the new model comes out. So actually, it's not about that. And we'll see this a lot in learning roles where people will say you have to know this learning system, but you
Mm.
don't, because it just completely is irrelevant because,
They all
like
work
you said,
similar.
they all work in a similar way. You need to understand the construct and understanding the architecture of how a learning system goes together. But it's almost the same. I might know how to use a camera or I might know how to use video editing software, but I might not understand why and what's
Yeah.
going on behind it. And where we bring a difference, say, learning systems, is we understand the why behind. So therefore, maybe to us, every learning system is more familiar because we're thinking about the basic constructs of what's there in that system, what it's trying to do at a structural level. Whereas some people are just looking at the frontline feature level, and they don't understand that, and therefore the transferability coming onto that durability and transferability is far lower. So we need to raise people into those things that are more evergreen, which is understanding customer storytelling, and the technical bits fall off the end, understanding the architecture of learning and those things they're trying to do of compliance, reporting, personalization. Those things sit behind it, but all people are worried about is the bottom level features. And without that, it makes it harder to move from one camera or one learning system to another.
That's probably why we're stuck with really boring and unimaginative learning out there, because we're focusing on the wrong things. But I think we could carry this conversation on for ages. I'd be really interested to find out what other people think about this and what they're actually focusing on. What is their learning that they're creating? Are you focusing on a kind of hot topic? Are you sticking with the fundamentals? Are you doing a combination of both? Have you got had to change the way that you're approaching learning? It'd be really interesting to find out what people are doing.
Absolutely. And if you've got any insights or you want to come on and share your thinking, then please get in touch. We'd love to share some other views and thoughts on the podcast on future episodes.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Learning Reinvented podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. If you've not already done so, please follow our podcast. And if the learning effect can help you and your organisation, please do get in touch. You can find both James and Katie on LinkedIn, and our contact details are in the show notes below.